Welcome. Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 132, Retro Gaming.
Yay.
Let's
Finally.
see. I seen the first comment already come up in here. I'm wondering how retro games relates to homelabbing. A you know, we'll try and draw that distinction. I'll agree it may be a bit loose. We think there's just this
Yeah.
big Venn diagram of people who like the retro games and people who like Home Lab. So there was actually a lot of this was feedback we have from the audience, maybe not particularly from the person commenting, but that they
Yeah.
wanted
Someone
to
asked.
see us do an episode on this.
Yep. Someone asked about it. And it is there's a lot of overlap because of I feel like it's very common that home lab people are trying to preserve something, whether it be music, movies, or in this case, games. But it is the case that it's not necessarily a home lab related topic. But someone asked about it, and I figured it would be a fun side. Well, I don't want to call it a side episode, but more of a fun side topic episode where
Yeah.
we could just kind of go down a rabbit hole. Also, I just completed 2 Udemy courses, so I haven't even touched my home lab until like yesterday. So I'm finally back into my home lab again after like a month of recording footage. But we have a retro gaming episode, which I'm especially excited for because that's my number 2 passion next to
Yeah.
Linux.
And I think some of the, like Jason said here, some of the side relation to it is retro games are different than modern gaming. And they're a
Right.
lot different because of the fact that you often have to learn some intricate things. You have to host the ROM somewhere. Sometimes you have to have specialized hardware to do the
Right.
emulation. It's one of those things like I believe it pushes a lot of people into this further knowledge realm of how processor emulation works. And one of the things is I did retro games probably because they were popular to do in the early days, but it also helped me gain better understanding of virtualization. Someone could certainly call me out at feedback at the Home Lab show and say, Tom's reaching. He just wants to talk about games. He's making excuses. I will
Well,
accept the hate
maybe
mail.
I am. I know I kind of am. In all honesty, like I'll own it. I don't mind owning that. It's fine by me.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is definitely overlap, but I also feel like, there's within the Venn diagram, there's also people that just love older technology, whether, you go to a flea market and find a Tandy, get excited, or a Commodore 64, or in my case, well, in my case, it's both that and retro gaming, but there's just something about home lab preserving things that I think kind of makes it a big part of it because we run into some of the same problems with retro gaming as we might run into when it comes to data shelf life, for example. When we talk about how long is that, if anyone still burns DVDs, how long is that going to last? Like 17 months, depending on how much light it hits. And we have some of those same problems with retro games. Maybe not quite the same, but there's still a similar technology. We have a processor, we have optical media, in some cases networking in the later ones. So there's a lot of interesting side topics around retro gaming.
Yeah. It causes you to think a lot very critically about some of the ownership you may have of games. You get
Right.
to lease them now with modern gaming because they all require a server. And that server may not ever have any of the source code disclosed. Reverse engineering it may be very tricky to figure out, like, hey, I'd like to play this particular game with my friends, but the server's gone because the game is old and the company that was supporting it is gone. How do we
Right.
play this anymore? Well, you don't, because it requires an online check for a server that no longer exists. There's been some interesting headway in things like the Wii store being re-emulated, because I know they've just got rid of some of the older, I think it's the Wii stuff, the first gen stuff. Some of that's gone now. And if you want to play those, like, well, if it has an online component to it, I know someone built some emulation stuff to kind of fix that. We're not going to get into that topic, but it's kind of, there's a
Yeah.
lot of interesting side topics, as Jay mentioned, kind of related to this. And it makes you think very critically about the technology involved in it, because you're like, wait a minute, I think I owned the game, but I don't, because the game's no longer
Right.
playable. And this is where the retro games become popular, because they were all built prior to all of this, which makes it kind of fun.
Right. And preservation is a great place to start because I think that's kind of where a lot of this comes from. Now, anytime you deal with licensing, as I'm sure everyone, listening to this podcast is well aware of, you're going to run into problems. It's just a random thing to mention because I'm not even thinking about this cartoon, but I was just, going through the news, and then there was this article about Jim Henson's answer as to why the Muppet Babies is never going to be streaming ever. Not, obviously I'm not trying to watch a cartoon, but it's interesting because it was a good cartoon, but it's interesting because they used clips from other movies. So now there's so many licensing issues
Mm,
with this cartoon that the likelihood of getting every single license holder that has ever had a clip in that cartoon back in the 80s, it's very unlikely that they're all going to agree. So then we get, fans of that would be punished by not being able to relive their childhood because the license holders say that they can't. When it comes to games, it would be great if we had like one service where it has like every single game ever made that we could legally purchase. I would absolutely love that, but we don't have that. Some of the game companies that existed are not in existence anymore. So if Nintendo, Sega, or whoever wants to, republish a game, they have quite the rabbit hole to go through to try to find out who owns the rights and things. It just becomes a nightmare. Meanwhile, if you find retro games at a pawn shop, you could just buy them. You don't talk to anyone. There's no licensing. You just play it. And I think that when you get to that point and you actually collect the old hardware, that's especially when preservation comes into play because without emulation, I know some people are against emulation, but just think about it. Some of these games would literally be impossible to enjoy again. There'd be zero ways of doing that if it wasn't for emulation, because the companies may or may not, probably won't do the right thing, or maybe they're not able to do the right thing due to licensing. And meanwhile, there's other alternatives for enjoying the classics if the companies aren't going to give us what we need.
yeah. What would you recommend as some good hardware, Jay, for the emulation of games? What's some of your favorites you have?
So I feel like the Retro Pi, or excuse me, Raspberry Pi is the best right now for anything. If you want to, I guess I should rewind a little bit. It depends on what you want to achieve, right? Because
Start with a goal.
yeah, if you want a portable one, if you want something to hook up to the TV, there's that. Do you just want to run it on your laptop? A lot of people don't realize this, but if you just simply install Ubuntu or whatever, Debian-based distribution, there's an install script for RetroPie that you can install. It becomes an icon on your desktop at that point if you do it this way. And it becomes an application that you can launch like any other application on your desktop, and it just gives you the full RetroPie interface, or it's on or a Raspberry Pi. So when it comes to Raspberry Pi, it's just so funny. Like I remember having a computer hooked up to the TV at one point with all my retro games on it, and I hand coded everything. And then RetroPie comes along and does it so much better. It's great. RetroPie is like an operating system for the Raspberry Pi that if you install it, it's a single focused OS. It's focused for retro gaming. So there's folders that are preset where you could put your ROMs if you have any. Obviously, you have to find them, and that's something we can't help you with because Nintendo's cracking down on this lately. But you put the ROMs in their associated folders, and then restart the interface, and then it picks them all up. It shows them in their appropriate category. It makes it a lot, I think, very easy to do. And there's also a GPi case that's portable where you can put a Raspberry Pi inside, and it comes with a USB and HDMI dock, Switch style. So you can hook it up to your TV, and you can hook up a Bluetooth controller to it as well. So to paint the picture for the people listening, it looks like a classic Game Boy. The same shape. It's a rectangle. It's bulky, but it's still cool because you can put a Raspberry Pi in there. Like I said, it has a built-in screen, built-in audio, built-in controller right there on the case, and it's just well, actually, that one uses the compute modules. I wanted to just make sure I mentioned that so someone doesn't buy a Raspberry Pi 5 and expect it to fit in the case. I haven't checked if they have a new one, but but regardless, there's these different cases you can buy that will help you build a RetroPie, and then you could be like me and use SyncThing and sync the save files between devices, which is another example of the Homelab kind of creeping into another seemingly unrelated hobby.
Yeah, the sync thing will sync on there. I will. Like I said, we can't tell you, about the ROMs. That is a fuzzy area as far as acquisition. You are supposed to own them. I've seen people say flea markets, estate sales. There's actually numerous places stores and whatnot that open up that kind of dedicated to retro gaming, which is cool. So you can acquire them. And as far as converting the cartridge into a ROM, there is devices for that. There
Right.
is the multi-game hunter, I believe, is one of them. Matt Fox is probably in here somewhere, and he can post a link to it. Someone else pointed out Mr. FPGA Project. That even has its own subreddit. So there's a few different ways that you can, if you physically own these ROMs, extract them so you have the ROMs because you own the rights to them, and they have declared that
Right.
converting them is not a violation. So that way you
Right.
don't have to necessarily have the old hardware on there.
Right. It's funny when people bring that up because, technically it is a violation, but the reason why it's not a violation is because it's not enforceable. If you're a company, putting this, or even as a person putting it on a website for other people to download, throwing out a blanket on your front lawn and selling flash drives with games on it, whatever you're doing, things like that obviously are illegal. But the fact of the matter is, there's no difference between dumping a ROM from a cartridge you purchased from a pawn shop than there is buying a CD at a pawn shop and doing the exact same thing and ripping the MP3s. At the end of the day, we're getting a digital copy of the contents of the media,
Right.
which is the same in both cases. And the other thing to keep in mind is we wouldn't even have to do this if the companies made the right choice. I mean, right now, I also wanted to mention the Wii U is dead now too, by the way, the online. So that's
Okay. Yeah.
also gone. Yeah, so Wii and Wii U now. 3DS, I think, is also dead. But with the Switch, you have an online service, which is weird. It's Super Mario World. Come on. But it's an online service. It's more of a rental service. I mean, think of it this way: if you're playing through an RPG, what's going to happen if you're 75% of the way through a very long game and they lose the rights? I mean, it's one thing to lose your place in a Netflix TV series, but can you imagine having to start over 40 hours of gameplay just because Nintendo decided that they can't have it on their platform anymore? To be fair, there's no, as far as I know, that hasn't happened yet, but with the Switch anyway, but it can, and it has in the past where rights are taken away. But when we own the item, then we can just do whatever we want with it. The problem is, I think this is the elephant in the room. When I first started collecting retro games, I mean, I think I paid $40 to get into this, and someone brought over, like, they had some extra games. They wanted $40. They brought over a big trash bag full of a Super Nintendo, like 30 games in there. I mean, you could barely give this stuff away, and it was practically worthless. But then years later, the price is just, I have no idea, but
Mhm.
you'd be shocked what some of these are going for. So I think that kind of makes it hard because normally I'd say, oh yeah, just go to the flea market and buy a bunch of games. But when you see a single cartridge for $300 or
Yeah.
north of that, then you're like, maybe I don't want to play that as bad as thought I did.
A combination of collectors and scarcity has certainly drove the price of these quite a bit up.
It is, but it's led to some really amazing discoveries, like the Nintendo PlayStation, which is a really fun rabbit hole to go down. Which Ben Heck tried to and actually successfully got working because talking about preservation. And you also, I mean, we run into these problems, and it's just really hard to know how to deal with it because you have save files. And this is another thing that I think Homelab is especially good for when it comes to solving this, because these cartridges had a watch battery. So when that watch battery dies, you lose your progress, and you have to solder in a new battery into the cartridge. It's not hard to do. And to be fair, you could get away with it with duct tape, but don't do that. Trust me, it looks weird. But anyway, you could replace the battery, but you lose your save progress. But think of TrueNAS, for example. You have versioned backups. Now imagine syncing your save files to a central source with versioned backups. Okay, so if your character gets killed in a Dungeons and Dragons game, then you can, I'm not saying anyone should, you could go back to your history and find a snapshot, old save file, throw it back in there. Oh yeah, I'm back to where I was yesterday. And you could have versions of your save files back from 90 days ago. And obviously that's overkill. I think some people are just happy with not losing their save file regardless of how complicated it is. But there's some real problems. And then you get into trying to make an older game system look good on a newer TV. Oh boy, now that's another rabbit hole. There's YouTube channels that cover only that,
Yeah.
basically.
The we mentioned RetroPie project, which I threw a link in it'll be in the description. It's in the comments. And it's a really good one for the Raspberry Pis because it turns your Raspberry Pi turnkey into an emulator that'll run your NES, SNES games, Sega games, etc. Lots of the 8-bit and 16-bit systems work very well on there. Worth noting is you do not need even Raspberry Pi 4. It will work on a 3. Most of your
Oh, yeah.
games will emulate on there. So if you have one of those Raspberry Pi 3s that you go, man, this isn't powerful enough to run certain applications that I may want to run today, go ahead and bring some new life into it. This is another good use of that old hardware. One of the nice things I like about the Raspberry Pi 3 is they had only a single HDMI out, but it was a full size one, so you're not fiddling with the different HDMI. So it's kind of convenient how those are. They're obviously really
Yep.
low wattage, low power, so they work really well for not consuming too much. They're small enough to stick to the back of the TV. For those who are looking for handheld gaming, no sponsor affiliate links here, but I'm a big fan. I have one. I don't think Jay's ever set his up,
No,
but
not yet.
Retroid, Retroid Pocket makes some really nice handhelds. I've had mine for over a year, and it is. I don't use my Raspberry Pi near as much anymore because after switching to the Retroid Pocket, I'm like, this is the way. It has a really high quality screen. One of the things I'll really say for their hardware is it's serviceable. They actually
Yeah.
have kits you can buy and parts and spare parts. So if you are really getting mad at a game and you mash a button a little too hard too many times and maybe it doesn't work as well, they actually built these things to be something you can take apart and actually DIY it. I
Right.
mean, on their site, I'm looking, and it's interesting to see the fact that they have for all of $9.90 the Hall joysticks that can be replaced on there. They have the
Mhm.
16-bit buttons, the D-pad buttons, $10. So each of these, even the little rubber things that go over them, all those little pieces, and they sell entire kits, including some of the screwdrivers to open it up if you don't have it. So you can get the extra screws, the pits, all the
Yep.
kits, the little I think it's called spudger, the little plastic thing to pop some of the
Yep.
stuff apart. But they design these to be serviceable. It's one of the reasons I like this company is it's not just about selling you a product, and if that product doesn't hold up, getting another one, but having all the little things. I'm looking at the D-pad for it. Like if you just need the rubber piece for the D-pad, $2. The shipping is more than the little part. So you could buy a whole kit of spare parts to probably save on shipping just so you have them if you're worried about it. But I'll admit,
Right.
not that I'm a hard user on it. After a year, my Retroid Pocket 3, it's holding up wonderful. I've had zero problems with it. So yeah, it is.
Yep.
It is one of the pieces of hardware that I found that I really like. 'Cause there's lots of cheap ones out there. This one's a little bit more expensive than some of the cheapest ones, but the serviceability makes it that much more interesting to me because I'm like, cool, I have something that is now built to last. Because it's not just, I don't want to go through trouble setting it up again. Even though I have SyncThing on it to back things up and I have all my save files and I could set it up again, it works. It's working. If I
Mhm.
broke the D-pad or wore it out in some way that I want to replace it, I just want to be able to pull it apart, replace it, and keep on going. The battery is replaceable in it as well, but the battery's lasted quite well over a year of all the charges I've had on it. So I really had no issues. Oh,
Yeah, that's a good device. I can't wait to set up mine. I mean, from what I've seen so far, that does seem to be a well-built device.
yeah. Worth noting too, if you are using, obviously we're talking about games. This is a real important thing. If you are doing the Raspberry Pi route, you're obviously going to have a controller. 8-bit do, hands down, just quality controllers. I do have one that the battery, I've bought it 5 or 6 years ago. The battery finally doesn't last as long as it's supposed to. So that's the only thing I have a complaint. The buttons are all held up, and I was going to order. I'm positive the battery is replaceable, and I just haven't taken it apart yet. But 8-bit do makes really nice controller inputs. They're
Oh, yeah.
yeah, they have, options that are Bluetooth. They have full kinda like the deck style ones like you would have in an arcade machine, so yeah, they have that. They have ones that look similar to the SNES controller. That's the one I have. It's one of my preferred ones, and it's also got different modes of operation, so it's not just a Bluetooth, but it actually can pair Bluetooth to Android versus Windows or Linux for different reasons. So when you're tying them to different devices, you may wanna have different types of controller input, including for Android. It may not want the same type. I forget the variation that's in there, but there's a way when you turn it on, you choose which one of those because one way works better than the other. I guess you put it in Android mode when you're putting it to an Android, and if you don't, you end up with weird button mapping problems. So there's kind of
Yep.
cool features about these that they thought through, not just to make a good quality piece of hardware, but to make a hardware compatible with whatever way you want to use it. And I believe they can also be plugged in just direct with USB and show up as a controller.
Yeah, they can. Yep.
Yeah, I
That is
think all the
that is
ones I've tested, I'll assume all of them can. I know the ones I've tested have. So that's another one though. It's really a solid product. That's one of the reasons we know there's so much interest in it. There's companies making higher quality stuff that's self-serviceable. That sounds like the same crowd that likes the Homelab show.
Yep. I wanted to mention about compatibility with the Pi, just to kind of give people a metric, uh, with a disclaimer that I haven't tried RetroPie on the Pi 5 yet. So this is basically with the Pi 4 and below. So at the Pi 4 and below with RetroPie, you can reasonably expect to run PlayStation 1 and lower. Okay, anything, I shouldn't say anything, like PlayStation 1 is probably the one that I would say is the last one that works pretty much flawlessly. Sega Saturn is more or less. I mean, actually, Sega Saturn is more powerful than the PS1, the 2D graphics processing. So that one often doesn't work well in emulation unless you have a really good hardware. But anything one generation above PS1 is going to really give the Raspberry Pi 4 a workout. I'm not saying you can't get it to work, but it's unlikely that you'll get it to work, as well as perhaps your Retroid Pocket would work, because my understanding is I think that one would probably play a few more systems than a Raspberry Pi 4 and below would play, especially Dreamcast. If you get into Dreamcast, Nintendo 64, Sega Saturn, those three, PlayStation Portable. I mean, they're really hard to get emulated on more constrained hardware. So there's that. There's also another thing I wanted to mention before I forget. I highly recommend Retro Gaming Cables UK. Okay, it's from the UK, so here in the United States, it takes a long time for shipping to happen, but it's so worth it, because you could buy like a $300 device to, hook up a old game system to a new TV, or you could go to Retro Gaming Cables, and it's not going to look as good as an expensive upscaler, just to be fair. But their cables, I thought they're like 40, 50 US dollars a piece, but I think they're probably the best possible picture you can get hooking your game system up via HDMI without buying an expensive upscaler. And a lot of people don't seem to know about them, which is kind of weird. I don't even remember how I found out about them. But when you buy one of these cables, it literally looks like you have I don't know if it's an Arduino or something. There's like in the middle of the cable, like a see-through housing, like they kind of just want you to know it's there. And inside is this little board that presumably does some sort of upscaling or something, but it's built right into the cable. So you just plug it into the system, plug it into your TV like you did back in the good old days, and it looks pretty decent. So if anyone is wanting to restore an old game system and hook it up to a 4K television or something, that might be the better way to go.
Yeah, you'll run into that challenge. You'll start realizing when you think about it, there's not a lot of TVs available anymore that have the same input. So you'll go down that
Right.
rabbit hole of that. That's one of the reasons I think it's cool, and I to have some of the old computer stuff and old retro gaming stuff, but you'll find it's not compatible with HDMI. So that's what all these
Right.
converters are about. Kind of
Yeah.
on the topic of old computers, and that's I think we've kind of touched on this subject a few times before, but this is something else you can emulate with the RetroPie is getting these old computers going. Now,
Oh
this is something
yeah.
we can talk about. The archive.org is where if you do just the minimal amount of Googling and getting started in some of this, you will be able to find all kinds of, because of copyright expiring and things like that, the base ROM that you need to get the OS running on something like a Commodore 64 that you may want to emulate. Veronica Explains has talked a lot about Commodore 64. There's been kind of a little bit of resurgence, and it's fun to play with some of those old computers and maybe test out not just the games on it, but actually play with the operating systems a little bit of how they were. It's maybe stretching to say there's a big learning experience there that is translatable, but it's still kind of cool to just think about the direct interactions you have with the hardware from those. And I've said that before, like it's kind of where I started, so I bring that back to fundamentals that I understand for how the system works. And because there's less of that hardware that you're emulating, you can get a better grasp on all the different chips involved in it. So less complexity level to do it.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely a fun place to play and lose several hours. There's also, I think, Rich, I think you can play some of these and do some testing. Archive.org, I believe it is the one that has the built-in emulators to emulate in your browser, so you can actually play with some of these right in the browser, which I think is really novel.
There's a game that's actually current that I want to shout out right now and tell people about, but there's a very old school angle to this. So there's this game series that I'm obsessed with. I don't talk about it much because most people haven't heard of it. So no, I'm not going to talk about Final Fantasy this time. That'll be a different episode. But Wizardry, it's a simple name, okay, but their first Wizardry game came out in 1981, and they remade it for current systems, and it's very, very faithful to the original. Obviously it has better graphics. The graphics are still not amazing, so Wizardry has never been a game for people that are into graphics. It came out in 1981. Okay, it was monochrome practically,
Yeah,
but basically it's a really fun game for people that love old school computer RPGs, where you have to get graph paper because it's, you have to map everything. You have to kind of keep track of where you are. So if you're looking for quality of life features, no, this is an old game. This is for people that specifically want the computer RPGs. I probably sunk over 100 hours into this thing right now, reliving my childhood. But it's a basically a dungeon crawler where you generate six party members, Dungeons and Dragons style. You choose their class, alignment, race, and you explore this dungeon, and it's relentless. Like there's perma-kills in this game, okay? And you can lose everything you spent on a character. So every decision you make is extremely important because you could literally destroy your own progress. It's a brutal game, but it's really fun, and they remade it on, I think it's on Switch, PS4, PS5, Xbox, PC, like pretty much everything. So highly recommended. It's not approved for the Steam Deck yet, but I have seen people play it on there. So somebody wants an old school game, but you have a new
yeah,
system, then that's the one that I recommend right now.
yeah. I see. So, oh, you have someone else who's a Wizardry fan in the comments. So
Oh, I'm
that's
so
awesome.
happy because it's just one of these games. Like I even have the complete in box editions, like mint for the old game systems, and the Wizardry Archive CD that contained like 8 different games on one CD. If you can acquire the Wizardry games, even if you're broke, if there's like, I don't know if archive.org has this. I don't think the copyright expired, but if there is a way to just find the CD or find these old games, they fit in less than like a floppy disk size because that's how it was originally released. So if you want something like really quick, you could run inside DOSBox. It's a really good way to sink some time, especially if you're watching a progress bar on your Homelab, one of your apps. You could just go, level up on Wizardry while you're waiting. It makes it less tedious.
Yeah, there's a Wikipedia entry for this about the game as well, and a whole
Oh yeah,
history of it,
yeah, yeah.
starting in 1981 and proceeding all the way through. So yeah, I'll drop that. I'm gonna go ahead and drop that in the notes here too. So yeah, definitely
Digital,
neat stuff.
Digital Eclipse, the people that made this game, like obviously I doubt they're fans of the show, but man, they did a great job doing this justice. Like Wizardry is like this timeless classic that not everyone has heard of, but it is pretty much the forefather of many of the computer RPG things that we enjoy today. It was pretty much blazing the trail along with Ultima back in the day. So definitely recommended to, if you have a new system, or even just download it on your computer through Steam. It's Wizardry. The full title is Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. It's the first of 8 total Wizardry games in the main series. So it's a
Yeah,
lot of fun.
yeah. Interestingly too, it was written in Pascal. The first version was so.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I actually didn't even know that, and it's a horrible, sad story what happened to the company. I remember waiting for Wizardry 8 coming out when I was a teenager, and they had some kind of problems, and they went like so bank. They put so much money into developing Wizardry 8, they didn't have enough money to release it. So they finished it. They had no money to publish it. So then they had to enter in a deal with Electronics Boutique just to sell Wizardry 8 only at those stores, which pretty much killed it because they didn't allow it sold anywhere else. And then rest in peace, Surtech Software. It was a good company while they're around, but they really did give us some good stuff. So
It's
definitely
good
check
while it
that out.
lasted.
And Also, yeah, definitely check out Retro Gaming Cables UK. I just don't remember the URL off the top of my head. We'll find it. If anyone's
Yeah.
looking for a good cable to hook up their old game system, RetroPie for those of you that want to set up something yourself, Retroid for those of you that don't want to set up everything yourself but still want to benefit from emulation.
Yep. I will drop all these links in the show notes. Or anything else we have for the people today, Jay?
I don't think so, not yet.
Awesome. All right. We're back at it. Jay's got his stuff published. Check out his updated guides he has in Udemy. You can learn more at learnlinux.tv. Everything's listed
Yep.
over there. He's got some new videos he dropped. He's got one I'm interested in too about some of the power tools that you can use for a Mac. I'm still dabbling a little bit in the Mac world, but I'm still Linux at heart. So, but it's still
Yep.
fun. I want to, I still like to play with other things and other toys. Not really much Windows. Windows is more pain to me every time I use it. But thank you
Yep.
for joining us. We'll see you next time and take care.